At 3 a.m., the pounding on my door didn't sound like knocking, it sounded like desperation. I'd been a police officer for 42 years. I knew the difference between someone who wanted help and someone who needed it right now. My service weapon was already in my hand when I threw open the door, though I'd been retired for 8 months and had no business carrying it to answer a knock at this hour. Old habits. What I wasn't prepared for was my daughter. Rebecca, my Becca, stood swaying in the porch light, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other clutched across her ribs. Her left eye was swollen shut, the skin around it already turning that deep purple black that meant the hit had been recent and hard. Blood trickled from her split lip. Her silk pajamas, the expensive ones Trevor had bought her for their anniversary, were torn at the shoulder, and I could see finger-shaped bruises wrapping around her upper arm like a bracelet of violence. "Mama," she whispered, and then her knees buckled. I caught her. 70 years old, arthritic in both knees, and I still caught my baby girl before she hit the ground. That's what mothers do. We catch our children when they fall, no matter how old we get, no matter how heavy they've become with the weight of their own lives. I dragged her inside, carefully, supporting her ribs because I suspected they were broken, and kicked the door shut behind us. My living room became a crime scene assessment in seconds. Defensive wounds on her forearms, contusions consistent with being struck repeatedly. That eye would need ice immediately to prevent permanent damage. The ribs needed x-rays. And the look in her one good eye? That was trauma. Fresh trauma from someone who'd taken away her sense of safety. Who did this? But I already knew. My voice was steady, professional, the same tone I'd used for thousands of domestic violence calls over 4 decades. "Rebecca, honey, who did this to you?" "Trevor." She could barely get his name out through her split lip. Vanessa called. She was crying, said she was pregnant. He got so angry when I confronted him. So angry, Mama. He said I was ruining everything. He said I was just like you, a bitter old woman who didn't understand what real love was. He said... She choked on a sob. He said the only reason he married me was because you owned that commercial property on Riverside, and he thought he'd inherit it eventually. He called me a long-term investment. My world didn't just turn red. It turned into every shade of rage I'd ever had to professionally suppress while wearing that badge. Trevor Hayes, my son-in-law of 12 years, the man who'd looked me in the eye at their wedding and promised to honor and cherish my daughter. The man who'd called me Mom Sullivan, with that easy smile that I'd thought was genuine, but now realized had always been calculating. The man who'd just made the worst mistake of his life. "We're going to the hospital," I said, reaching for my phone. "And then you're filing charges." "No!" Becca grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "No police, Mama. Please. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd destroy me. He's been taking photos, staging things, making it look like I'm unstable. He showed me tonight pictures of wine bottles in my car, prescription pills in my purse that I've never seen before. He's been setting me up for months, he said. If I go to the police, he'll say I'm making it all up because I'm mentally ill. He'll take everything in the divorce. He'll make sure I never work again. He has friends, Mama. Important friends." I looked at my daughter. My brilliant daughter who'd graduated summa cum laude, who ran her own marketing firm, who'd been slowly isolated and gaslit by a man who'd seen her as nothing more than a path to my property. And something crystallized inside me. Trevor Hayes thought he was smart. He thought he'd covered his bases. He thought that because I was a retired cop with no jurisdiction, I was powerless. He thought a badge was just a piece of metal I'd turned in when I left the force. But what Trevor didn't know, what he was about to learn, was that I hadn't just been any cop. I'd spent 15 years in financial crimes before moving to domestic violence. I knew how men like him operated. I knew how to find hidden assets, trace money laundering, document patterns of abuse that stood up in court. And I had something Trevor would never have, a network of people who owed me favors, who respected me, who would move heaven and earth to help me because I'd done the same for them over 4 decades of service. "Okay," I said softly, pulling Becca close while being careful of her injuries. "No hospital. Not tonight. But honey, you need to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded against my shoulder, and I felt her tears soaking through my nightgown. "Good. Because Trevor made one critical mistake tonight." I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, the way I used to when she was small and had nightmares. "He hit a cop's daughter. And not just any cop, he hit my daughter. What they don't know is that this bitter old woman has been watching. This retired officer has been noticing things, small things, inconsistencies. And I've already been making calls." I felt Becca pull back to look at me with her one good eye, confusion mixing with hope. "What do you mean?" I smiled then, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile I used to give suspects who thought they'd gotten away with something when I already had them dead to rights. "I mean that Trevor and his mistress are about to discover that my badge might be retired, but my oath isn't. I swore to uphold justice. And you're about to see what that really means." But what they didn't know was that I had already been planning. They didn't know that this 70-year-old woman had one more card to play. Several cards, actually. And I was about to lay them all on the table. 2 months earlier. The thing about getting old is that people stop seeing you. You become invisible, a piece of furniture in your own life. When you're 70 and gray-haired and your knees crack when you stand up, people talk over you, around you, about you, but never really to you. I'd noticed it happening gradually after I retired from the Riverside Police Department 8 months ago. Suddenly, opinions I'd have given as Sergeant Dorothy Sullivan, decorated officer with commendations for bravery and investigative work, became the rambling thoughts of old Dot who needed to be humored and then ignored. My daughter was the worst offender, though I don't think she realized it. It was a Tuesday morning, August 15th to be exact, when I first started to see the pattern clearly. I'd met Becca for coffee at the Riverside Bean, our usual spot every other week. I arrived at 9:30 a.m. sharp because punctuality had been drilled into me at the academy 43 years ago, and some habits you just don't break. Architected emotional narrative arc with specific details and elderly narrator voice. I need to continue building this story with specific details and the emotional arc. Let me develop the 2-month flashback showing. The protagonist's routine and independence. Signs of Trevor's true nature. Small disrespects building up. The protagonist's growing awareness. Her secret preparations. I should include specific financial details, conversations with friends, legal consultations, evidence gathering, the WhatsApp groups, morning walks, memories of raising Becca. Let me continue with natural, conversational language that feels like an elderly narrator telling their story. Becca was 20 minutes late, which wasn't unusual anymore. She rushed in looking harried, designer handbag clutched in one hand, phone in the other, that perpetual stressed expression that had become her default over the past year. "Sorry, Mama, sorry," she said, kissing my cheek quickly before sliding into the booth across from me. "Trevor needed me to sign some papers before his meeting with the contractor, and you know how he is about his timeline." I did know. Trevor Hayes was a real estate developer with an ego the size of his supposedly impressive portfolio. He'd started Hayes Development 5 years ago, and according to him, he was on the verge of becoming Riverside's next big success story. According to my own quiet research, because old cop habits die hard, he was leveraged to his eyeballs and hemorrhaging money on projects that kept hitting unexpected delays. "How's the Jefferson Street project coming?" I asked innocently, sipping my black coffee. I'd read in the Riverside Chronicle 2 days ago that the Jefferson Street renovation had been red-tagged by the city inspector for unpermitted work. Funny how Trevor hadn't mentioned that to Rebecca. Becca's smile flickered. "Good. Great, actually. Trevor says we're right on schedule. We. She always said we now as if Trevor's business was her business, even though I knew for a fact that her name wasn't on a single LLC document. I'd checked. Public records are beautifully transparent when you know where to look. That's wonderful, honey. How's your firm doing? You had that meeting with the Anderson account, right? Oh. She waved her hand dismissively. I had to cancel. Trevor needed me to meet with his architect, and you know how hard it is to get on David Brennan's schedule. My stuff can wait. Her stuff. Her marketing firm that she'd built from nothing, that had been thriving 3 years ago, that had won awards and recognition. That was now apparently just stuff that could wait while she played assistant to her husband's sinking ship. I bit my tongue. Literally bit it, because I'd learned that expressing concern made Rebecca defensive, made her protect Trevor, made her pull away from me. So instead, I nodded and changed the subject to safer ground. Her garden, her book club, the weather. But I filed it away. The late arrivals, the scattered energy, the way she kept checking her phone with increasing anxiety, the way she flinched slightly when it buzzed with a text, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. After coffee, I drove to Riverside Park for my morning walk. I'd been doing 3 miles every day since my retirement, doctor's orders to keep my knees functional and my blood pressure down. The park was beautiful in mid-August, the old oak trees providing shade, the river glinting in the morning sun. "Dorothy!" Beatrice Wu called out from the bench where our group congregated every morning at 11 a.m. "You're late! We were about to send a search party." Beatrice was 72, a retired federal prosecutor who could still argue circles around lawyers half her age. Next to her sat Lorraine Martinez, 68, former chief financial officer at Riverside Memorial Hospital, and Gloria Chen, 75, who'd owned the most successful restaurant in town for 40 years before selling it to her nephew. We called ourselves the Justice League, which was cheesy but accurate. Between the 4 of us, we had over 170 years of professional experience dealing with fraud, abuse, financial crimes, and general human nonsense. We'd formed our group 3 years ago, bonded by early morning walks and a shared intolerance for injustice. "Had coffee with Becca," I explained, settling onto the bench with a grunt that was more relief than pain. She was late. Again. "Still doing everything for that husband?" Lorraine asked, her dark eyes sharp. "Girl needs to remember she had a career before Mr. Wonderful came along." "He's bleeding her dry," Gloria said bluntly, pulling out her phone. She still kept up with every bit of business gossip in Riverside. "My nephew says Hayes Development owes money all over town. Contractors, suppliers, everybody. Word is he's desperate for capital." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "How desperate?" "Desperate enough to start asking about your properties," Beatrice said quietly. "My granddaughter works at Riverside Bank. She mentioned, casually, just in conversation, that Trevor Hayes has been in multiple times asking about property values on commercial real estate on Riverside Drive. Specifically, the building you own. The one with the 4 retail spaces and the offices above. The building my late husband Frank and I had bought 35 years ago for $127,000. The building that was now worth $2.3 million because Riverside had gentrified and the location was prime. The building that generated $18,000 a month in rental income, which supplemented my pension quite nicely and would be my daughter's inheritance someday. "He can ask all he wants," I said evenly. "That building's in a trust. He has no claim to it." "Unless Rebecca signs it over," Lorraine pointed out. "If she's joint on the trust." "She's not." I'd made sure of that 5 years ago when Trevor first came sniffing around with his slick smile and his expensive suits. Something about him had set off my instincts, that same tingle I used to get when a suspect's story didn't quite add up. So I'd restructured everything, put it all in an irrevocable trust with my attorney Richard Winters as trustee. Rebecca was the beneficiary, but she couldn't touch the principal until my death, and even then it was protected from creditors and spouses in case of divorce. Frank had always said I was paranoid. I'd always said I was prepared. But Trevor doesn't know that, Beatrice mused. He thinks the building's just in your name, eventually to pass to Rebecca. And if something happened to you, Gloria trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. We all sat in silence for a moment, 4 old women on a park bench watching the river flow by, while darker thoughts flowed through our minds. I'm being paranoid, I finally said. Trevor's an entitled jerk, but he's not dangerous. Maybe, Beatrice said, but I spent 30 years prosecuting white-collar criminals. Men who embezzle, who defraud, who steal. They escalate when they're cornered. They don't stop at financial crimes. They get desperate. Start documenting everything, Lorraine advised. Every conversation, every interaction. Dates, times, witnesses. You know the drill. I did know the drill. But this was my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. This was family, not a case file. Except, wasn't that what every victim said? He's family. He wouldn't really hurt me. I'm being paranoid. I'll keep my eyes open, I promised. We moved on to other topics. Gloria's grandson's wedding, Beatrice's ongoing battle with the city council over park funding, Lorraine's new great-granddaughter. Normal things, comfortable things. But that cold feeling in my stomach stayed with me all through my walk home. That evening, I did what I'd been trained to do. I investigated. My home office was still set up like a command center, despite my retirement. File cabinets, computer with dual monitors, printer, scanner, shredder. My personal cell phone and my old work phone, which I'd kept active because it had contacts I couldn't bear to delete. 42 years of police work doesn't just disappear when you turn in your badge. I started with public records. Trevor Hayes, age 37, married to my daughter for 12 years. No criminal record, which I'd already known. I'd run a background check before the wedding, much to Rebecca's horror at the time. Mama, you can't investigate my fiancé like he's a suspect. Watch me. But financial records told a different story than criminal ones. Hayes Development LLC formed 7 years ago with Trevor as registered agent and sole member. 3 major projects in the past 4 years. The Jefferson Street renovation, $2.1 million budget, currently red-tagged and over budget by $340,000. The Riverside Commons project, $4.7 million budget, stalled for 9 months due to permit issues, which I strongly suspected meant Trevor had cut corners and gotten caught. The Lakeside Luxury Apartments, $6.2 million budget, marketed as exclusive waterfront living, currently only 40% sold after 2 years on the market. I pulled up the property records for each project. Every single one was leveraged to the maximum, with multiple liens from contractors, suppliers, and subcontractors. Trevor owed money to at least 17 different companies, totaling over $890,000 in unpaid bills. Then I looked at Trevor and Rebecca's personal finances, or at least what I could access through public records. Their house, the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street that Trevor was so proud of, had been refinanced 3 times in the past 2 years. They'd pulled out $275,000 in equity, and I was willing to bet that money had gone straight into Hayes Development's failing projects. The picture was clear. Trevor Hayes was drowning. And drowning men grab onto anything to stay afloat. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Mama, would you mind if Trevor and I came by this weekend? He wants to talk to you about something important. Sunday, around 2? My instincts, honed by 4 decades of reading people and situations, started screaming. Of course, honey, I texted back. I'll make your favorite lemon cake. Then I opened a new document on my computer and titled it, Case File, Trevor Hayes, Preliminary Observations. I might be retired, but I wasn't stupid, and I certainly wasn't unprepared. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, every conversation with Rebecca over the past year where she'd seemed stressed or distracted, Every time Trevor had asked casual questions about my properties, my finances, my estate plans, every instance of Rebecca canceling plans or showing up with bruises she claimed were from being clumsy. 3 times in 6 months. I'd noted them at the time, filed them away in my memory the way I filed away every detail that didn't quite fit. By the time I finished, it was 11 p.m., and I had 7 pages of single-spaced observations. Not evidence, not yet, but a foundation, a timeline, the beginning of a pattern. I printed 2 copies, one for my home safe, one for Richard Winters's office. Tomorrow, I'd call Richard and schedule an appointment before Sunday. Because if Trevor wanted to have an important talk, I wanted to be prepared. My phone buzzed again. A WhatsApp message in the Justice League group chat. Beatrice. My granddaughter just texted. Trevor Hayes was at the bank again today. Asked about property loan values and life insurance policies on older borrowers. She thought it was odd enough to mention. Lorraine. Life insurance? That's specific. Gloria. That's predatory. Me. He's coming to talk to me Sunday. Says it's important. Beatrice. Record everything. Legally you can in your own home. And call me after. Actually, call all of us. Lorraine. Want backup? We could be stopping by for coffee at 2:15. Gloria. Forget coffee. I'll bring my nephew. He's a lawyer. Entertainment lawyer, but still, he can look intimidating. Despite everything, I smiled. This was what friendship looked like at 70. Not book clubs and gardening tips, though we did that too, but fierce loyalty, strategic planning, and a shared understanding that some battles required all hands on deck. Me. Let me see what he wants first. But thank you, all of you. Beatrice. We've got your 6, Sullivan. Always. That was cop speak for, I've got your back. Beatrice had picked up a lot of our jargon over the years of friendship. It was oddly comforting, knowing that even in retirement, even at 70, I wasn't alone. Sunday arrived with perfect weather. Sunny, 75 degrees, a light breeze. The kind of day that should have been pleasant. I'd made Rebecca's favorite lemon cake, a recipe I'd perfected over 40 years of birthday parties and special occasions. I'd also discreetly positioned my phone on the bookshelf, camera facing the living room, set to record audio and video. Legal in my own home, as Beatrice had confirmed. Trevor and Rebecca arrived at 2:03 p.m. I noted the time in my mental log. Trevor looked good, I had to admit. He'd always been handsome in that polished country club way, dark hair graying at the temples, expensive suit even on a Sunday, teeth too white to be natural. He carried a leather portfolio, the kind lawyers used for important documents. Rebecca looked tired. She was wearing long sleeves despite the heat, and I caught a glimpse of a bruise on her wrist when she reached out to hug me. 5 months pregnant with stress, I thought, not a baby. Though for a brief moment I wondered if there might be a child involved that I didn't know about. Mama! Rebecca's embrace was tight, almost desperate. Thank you for having us. Always, honey. Come in, sit down. I made your cake. We settled in the living room, me in Frank's old recliner, Rebecca and Trevor on the couch. I'd arranged it deliberately, putting them with their backs to the bright window, me in the shadowed comfort of the corner. Old interrogation technique. Control the light, control the room. So, I said pleasantly, folding my hands in my lap. What's this important talk about? Trevor flashed that $1 million smile. Well, Mom Sullivan, I wanted to discuss something that could benefit all of us, especially Rebecca's future. Mom Sullivan. He only called me that when he wanted something. I'm listening. As you know, Hayes Development has been growing tremendously over the past few years. We're on the verge of several major expansions, but we need capital to take things to the next level. I've been looking at investment opportunities, and I keep coming back to your property on Riverside Drive. There it was. I kept my expression neutral, interested but not eager. The building with the retail spaces. Exactly. He leaned forward, enthusiasm building. Or what was meant to look like enthusiasm. To me, it looked like desperation. That property is sitting on a gold mine of potential, but it's underutilized. Those old retail spaces, the outdated offices above, Mom Sullivan with proper development, that building could be worth 4, even 5 million. I'd like to propose a partnership. You deed the building to Hayes Development, we renovate it, and we split the profits 60-40 in your favor. You'd see returns you never imagined. I nodded slowly. Sounds interesting. But why would I deed you the building instead of just selling it? I could get $2.3 million right now, according to the last appraisal. Because... Trevor's enthusiasm kicked up a notch. This way, you maintain ownership, technically, while we do all the work. No capital outlay for you, massive returns, and you're still the primary owner. Technically, I repeated softly. And, Trevor continued, opening his portfolio and pulling out a stack of papers, I've taken the liberty of having my attorney draw up the partnership documents. All you need to do is sign, and we can start the process immediately. The building would be transferred to the development company, renovations would begin within a month, and... Wait. I held up a hand. You said I'd maintain ownership, but you also said transfer the building to your company. Which is it? Trevor's smile tightened slightly. Well, for legal purposes, the building would need to be held by the LLC, but you'd retain majority interest. How much interest? What percentage? That's in the documents. What percentage, Trevor? A long pause. Rebecca was looking between us, confusion starting to cloud her face. 20%, Trevor finally said. But that's just on paper. In reality, you'd have full say in all decisions. So I'd give you a $2.3 million building in exchange for a 20% stake in your company that's currently underwater by about $1 million? I asked pleasantly. Does that sound like a good deal to you, Rebecca? My daughter blinked. What? Trevor, you said Mama would keep the building. She will, in essence. The building would be part of the company assets, and she'd be a partner. A minority partner with no actual control over an asset I currently own outright? I stood up, and even at 70 with creaky knees, I managed to make it look authoritative. Trevor, I was a cop for 42 years, 15 of those in financial crimes. Did you really think I wouldn't see this for exactly what it is? Trevor's face flushed. Mom Sullivan, you're misunderstanding. No, I understand perfectly. You're broke. Hayes Development is failing. You've got liens all over town, projects that are hemorrhaging money, and you need an influx of capital desperately. You thought you could manipulate an old woman into signing over her property because I'm just some retired cop who doesn't understand business. Did I miss anything? The room went silent. Rebecca was staring at Trevor, and I watched the pieces starting to come together in her mind. The late nights, the stress, the constant refinancing of their house. Is this true? She whispered. Becca, honey, your mother is being paranoid. Is this true? Trevor stood abruptly. You know what? Fine. Yes, the company has some cash flow issues, but that's normal in development. And yes, I was hoping your mother would be smart enough to see a good investment opportunity. But apparently she'd rather hoard her property and let it sit there doing nothing while her own family struggles. My family isn't struggling, I said calmly. Rebecca has her own business, her own income. You're the one struggling, Trevor, and you thought you'd fix it by taking advantage of me. Taking advantage? Trevor's voice rose, and for the first time, I saw real anger flash in his eyes. Something mean, something cruel. You sit here in your little house with your cop stories and your property and your pension, acting like you're so smart, so independent. But you're just a bitter old woman who can't let go of the past. Rebecca deserves better than a mother who won't even help her own daughter's husband when he's trying to build something. Trevor! Rebecca stood up, her face pale. Don't talk to my mother like that. Why not? It's true. She's been against me from day one, running background checks, asking questions, never trusting me. And now, when I try to include her in something that could benefit everyone, she throws it in my face. I watched him carefully. This was the real Trevor Hayes emerging, the one who'd been hidden under expensive suits and careful smiles, the one who felt entitled to other people's money, other people's property, other people's trust. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Oh, we're leaving." Trevor grabbed his portfolio, papers scattering. "And you know what, Mom Sullivan? You just made a big mistake. A huge mistake. Because there are other ways to get what I need. Remember that." He stormed out. Rebecca stood frozen for a moment, tears streaming down her face, before running after him. I heard their car start, heard the screech of tires as Trevor peeled out of my driveway. I waited until they were gone before picking up my phone and stopping the recording. 43 minutes of footage, including Trevor's threats. I immediately backed it up to 3 different cloud services and texted a copy to Richard Winters with a message, "Need to see you tomorrow morning. Urgent." Then I sat down in Frank's old recliner and let myself shake for a moment. Because that look in Trevor's eyes at the end? That was the look I'd seen in dozens of perpetrators over the years. The look of someone who'd decided that the rules didn't apply to them, that they were owed something, that they'd take it one way or another. "Remember that," he'd said. Oh, I would remember. And I would be ready. My phone buzzed immediately. The Justice League group chat had exploded. Beatrice, Gloria's nephew, was across the street. He saw Trevor peel out. "What happened?" Lorraine, "Are you okay?" Gloria, "Need us to come over?" I typed quickly. "I'm fine. He wanted me to sign over my building." I refused. "He threatened me. I have it all on video. Meeting with Richard tomorrow. We'll update after." Beatrice, "Good. Document everything. This isn't over." She was right. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in preparation. I didn't just document, I built a case. Richard Winters reviewed the video recording and immediately advised me to file a police report about Trevor's threat. I did, though I kept it vague. Just a civil dispute with my son-in-law who'd made concerning statements. The responding officer, a young woman named Martinez who'd been a rookie when I retired, took my statement seriously. She knew my reputation. She also quietly mentioned that there'd been 2 domestic disturbance calls to Rebecca and Trevor's address in the past 6 months, both times neighbors reporting loud arguments. But Rebecca had refused to make statements both times. I filed that information away like gold. I also called in some favors. Detective Marcus Williams, who'd been my partner for 8 years before I retired, did some quiet checking on Trevor's business dealings. What he found was even worse than I'd suspected. Trevor hadn't just borrowed from legitimate sources. He'd taken private loans from some questionable investors, the kind who didn't file paperwork with the county clerk, the kind who expected repayment with interest, and who didn't take "I'm broke" as an answer. Marcus said over coffee one morning, sliding a folder across the table to me. "Your son-in-law is in deep with some dangerous people. Like, might end up in the river dangerous. I'm talking about Johnny Volkov's crew." I felt my blood run cold. Johnny Volkov ran most of the underground lending in Riverside, and while he preferred to stay under the radar, everyone knew his collection methods weren't filed with the Better Business Bureau. "How much does Trevor owe them?" $250,000, due last month, with penalties closer to 300 grand now. Jesus Christ. Does Rebecca know? Does any wife know when her husband is in over his head with the mob? Marcus shook his head. You need to get your daughter away from this guy. Before he does something stupid. Or before Volkov's people decide she's collateral. I spent that entire evening trying to reach Rebecca, calling and texting. She finally responded at 10 p.m. "I need some space, Mama. Trevor's really upset about what happened. Please respect our privacy right now." Trevor had gotten to her first, spun his version of events, made me the villain, himself the victim. Fine. If I couldn't reach her directly, I'd build a case so airtight that when I finally presented it, she'd have no choice but to see the truth. I worked with Richard to strengthen my trust documents, making absolutely certain Trevor could never touch my properties even if Rebecca somehow signed something. I met with my financial advisor and moved assets around, creating layers of protection that would take a forensic accountant months to untangle if anyone tried to challenge them. I drove by Rebecca's house at least 3 times a week, just checking, making sure her car was there, looking for signs of… what? I didn't know. Trouble. Escalation. The inevitable explosion that was coming. Lorraine used her contacts at the hospital to quietly check if Rebecca had been to the ER. She had. Twice in the past 4 months. Once for falling downstairs, resulting in a sprained ankle. Once for walking into a door, resulting in 3 stitches on her forehead. Every victim's excuse. Every battered woman's lie to protect her abuser. I documented it all. Dates, times, witness statements from Lorraine's sources. Photos I'd managed to take of Rebecca's injuries during our coffee dates, zoomed in and enhanced on my computer. Records of Trevor's debts, his failing business, his desperation. But it wasn't until the night of September 18th that everything came to a head. I got a call from an unknown number at 11:47 p.m. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Sullivan? A woman's voice, young, scared. Yes? My name is Vanessa Torres. I need to talk to you about Trevor Hayes. My heart started pounding. I'm listening. I'm pregnant, with his baby. He said he was going to leave Rebecca, that they were separating anyway, that he'd take care of me. But now he's saying he can't, that he needs money from some property first. That Rebecca's mother is being difficult. That's you, right? You're Rebecca's mother? I sat down heavily. Yes, I am. He's been using me. I realize that now, and I heard him on the phone tonight with someone. Some guy named Johnny. Trevor was saying he had a plan, that he'd get the money soon, that his old bat of a mother-in-law wouldn't be a problem much longer. Mrs. Sullivan, I think he's planning to do something to you. The cold that had been living in my stomach since Sunday crystallized into ice. Vanessa, I need you to tell me everything. And I need you to meet me tomorrow with proof of everything you know. Can you do that? She hesitated. If he finds out I talked to you? He won't. I promise. I spent 42 years protecting people from men like Trevor. Let me protect you now. And help me protect my daughter. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. at the Riverside Bean? I'll be there. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I called Marcus. I need to reopen that report from 3 weeks ago, I said without preamble, and I need to upgrade it to a credible threat. Trevor Hayes is planning something, and I need protection for both Rebecca and myself. What happened? His mistress called. She overheard him talking to Johnny Volkoff about getting rid of the problem. Marcus, I'm the problem he's talking about. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm putting a patrol car on your street starting tonight. And Dot? Maybe it's time to bring Rebecca in, whether she wants to come or not. I know. My voice cracked slightly. I know. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, service weapon on the nightstand, loaded, safety on, exactly as I'd been trained, listening to every sound. At 3 a.m., I heard a car driving slowly past my house. At 4 a.m., I heard footsteps on my porch. I grabbed my weapon and went to check, but whoever it was had already left. All they'd left behind was a business card wedged in my door. No name on the card, just a number and a message in block letters. Sell or else. I photographed it immediately, called Marcus, and added it to my growing case file. Trevor wasn't just desperate anymore. He was dangerous. The next day, I met Vanessa Torres at the coffee shop. She was 26, pretty in an obvious way, and clearly out of her depth. She brought her phone, which contained dozens of text messages from Trevor, including several where he explicitly discussed getting rid of the old woman before she ruins everything, and making it look like an accident, burglary gone wrong. I recorded everything, took photos of the messages, and got Vanessa's sworn statement in writing with Richard Winters as witness. She also told me about Trevor's plan to stage Rebecca as mentally unstable, showed me photos he'd taken of fake evidence of drinking and pill abuse, explained how he was preparing for a divorce where he'd claim Rebecca was an unfit spouse and take everything. "He doesn't love her," Vanessa said, tears streaming down her face. "He never did. He told me she was just a means to an end. That once he got your property, he'd divorce her and leave her with nothing. He's a monster, Mrs. Sullivan. And I was stupid enough to believe him when he said he loved me too." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're not stupid. You're young, and you believed someone you trusted. That's not stupidity, that's being human. But now you're being brave, and that's what matters." After Vanessa left, I went straight to the police station and met with Marcus and his sergeant. I laid out everything: Trevor's threats, his connection to Volkov, the evidence from Vanessa, the pattern of abuse toward Rebecca, the staged evidence for a divorce, the business failures, the debts. "This man is about to do something desperate," I said, spreading 40 pages of documentation across the conference table. "He's cornered, he owes dangerous people money, and he's fixated on my property as his way out. I need protection for myself and for my daughter, and I need you to be ready when he makes his move, because he will make a move." The sergeant, a man named Tom Brennan, who'd been on the force for 30 years, looked through my documentation and whistled low. This is detective-level investigative work. You built an entire case here." "I was a cop for 42 years, Tom, and now I'm a mother protecting her daughter. Which do you think makes me more thorough?" He smiled grimly. "Point taken. We'll assign protection details starting tonight. Plainclothes units on your street and Rebecca's street. If Trevor makes a move toward either of you, we'll be there." "Thank you." But as I drove home, I knew it wasn't enough. Police protection was reactive, not proactive. They could catch Trevor in the act, but by then, someone might already be hurt. Rebecca might already be hurt worse than she had been. I needed to do something to force Trevor's hand, to make him move before he was ready, while I had all the pieces in place to stop him. That night I made a decision that some might call reckless. I called Trevor directly. "Mom Sullivan." His voice was cold. "What do you want?" "I've been thinking about your proposal," I said calmly. "About the property. I may have been hasty in rejecting it. Would you like to come by tomorrow to discuss it? Just you and me, no Rebecca. Let's see if we can work something out." Silence. Then, "Really?" "Really. I'm an old woman, Trevor. I've been thinking about my legacy, about what Rebecca will inherit. Maybe a partnership isn't such a bad idea. Come by tomorrow at 8 p.m. We'll talk." I could practically hear his greedy little mind spinning. "I'll be there." "Good. See you then." I hung up and immediately called Marcus. "He's taking the bait. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., he's coming to my house. I told him I'd reconsidered the property deal." "You're using yourself as bait." "I'm using myself as the trap, Marcus. Big difference." "You'll have units positioned?" "Yes, but then trust me. I've been doing this since before you were born. I know how to handle dangerous men." The next day felt like the longest of my life. I called the Justice League and told them what I was doing. "Are you insane?" Gloria practically yelled into the phone. "You're inviting a desperate man with mob connections into your home?" "I'm inviting him into a controlled environment where I have the advantage and police backup," I corrected. "There's a difference." "We're coming over," Beatrice announced. "All of us. We'll be next door at Lorraine's house, close enough to help if something goes wrong." "Fine, but stay at Lorraine's. I need this to play out." That evening at 7:45 p.m., I did a final check of my setup. Cameras recording, service weapon loaded and positioned, Marcus's number on speed dial, patrol units in position 2 houses down, ready to move in on my signal. At 8:03 p.m., Trevor's car pulled into my driveway. I opened the door with a smile. "Trevor, come in." He entered warily, looking around like he expected a trap. Smart man. Too bad he wasn't smart enough to realize the trap had already been sprung the moment he agreed to come. "So," he said, settling on the couch, "you've reconsidered?" "I have." I sat down across from him. "I realize I was being stubborn. You were right. I'm an old woman holding on to property I don't really need. And Rebecca's happiness is important to me." Trevor's eyes lit up with greed. That's great, Mom Sullivan. Really great. I have the papers right here." He pulled out his portfolio again. "Before we sign anything," I said calmly, "I need to be honest with you about something." "What's that?" "I know about Vanessa Torres. I know about Johnny Volkov and the $300,000 you owe him. I know about the domestic disturbance calls to your house. I know about the fake evidence you've been planting to frame Rebecca. I know about your failing business, your debts, and your plan to divorce my daughter and leave her with nothing. In fact, Trevor, I know everything, and I have proof of all of it." Trevor's face went from confused to panicked to enraged in the space of 3 seconds. "You lying bitch! You never intended to sign—" "Of course not. Did you really think I was that stupid? I brought you here to tell you face to face that you're done. I've filed police reports, gathered evidence, and built a case against you that will bury you. I also spoke to Johnny Volkov personally today. Oh yes, I still have some interesting contacts, and informed him that you've been planning to use fraudulent means to get money to repay him. Johnny doesn't like fraud. It's bad for business. He's not happy with you, Trevor." Trevor stood abruptly, and I saw his hand move to his pocket. My training kicked in. I had my weapon out and pointed at him before he'd even fully reached for whatever he was carrying. "Hands where I can see them," I said in my cop voice. Firm, authoritative, brooking no argument. "Now, Trevor." He froze, hands half raised. In his right hand was a knife. Nothing fancy, just a kitchen knife, but deadly enough. "You were planning to kill me tonight," I said, and it wasn't a question. "Stage it as a burglary gone wrong. Take my keys, get into the trust documents in my safe, and forge whatever you needed. That was the plan, wasn't it?" Trevor's face contorted with rage and fear. "You ruined everything. Everything! I had it all figured out, and you just couldn't mind your own business." "You made it my business when you threatened my daughter, when you hit her, when you used her and manipulated her and destroyed her confidence. That was your fatal mistake, Trevor. You can threaten me all you want, but the moment you touched Rebecca, you sealed your fate." "I'll kill you!" He lunged forward, knife raised, and for a 70-year-old woman with bad knees, I moved pretty damn fast. I sidestepped, brought my weapon up, and fired a single shot, not at him, but at the ceiling. The gunshot was deafening, the signal Marcus had been waiting for. Trevor froze. In the distance, sirens wailed. Closer, the sound of running feet as the patrol unit stationed outside burst through my front door, weapons drawn. "Riverside Police! Drop the weapon!" Trevor dropped the knife. His face was ashen, all the bravado gone. As the officers cuffed him and read him his rights, he looked at me with pure hatred. "You'll pay for this," he spat. "You think you're so smart, but I'll find a way." "No, Trevor," I said quietly. "You won't, because I didn't just gather evidence against you for assault and attempted murder. I gathered evidence of all your fraud, your embezzlement, your illegal business practices. You're going away for a very long time. And Rebecca? She's finally free of you." As they led him away, Marcus came over and gently took my weapon. "You okay, Dot?" I was shaking, adrenaline coursing through my 70-year-old veins. "I'm okay. Is Rebecca?" "Already picked up by protective custody. She's at the station. She's safe." I nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Good. That's good." The Justice League came bursting in from Lorraine's house, all 3 of them talking at once, checking on me, alternating between scolding and praising my recklessness. That, Beatrice said firmly, was either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever done, Dorothy Sullivan. Probably both, I admitted. That brings us back to where I started. The 3 a.m. knock on my door, 8 days ago. Because Trevor made bail, something I hadn't anticipated, though I should have. He still had friends with money, or at least enough to make bail on the initial charges while he awaited trial. And the first thing he did when he got out was go home and take his rage out on Rebecca. She'd shown up at my door broken and terrified, and I'd held her while she cried and told me everything. How Trevor had gotten worse over the past year, the emotional abuse escalating to physical violence. How he'd isolated her from friends, from me, making her believe she was worthless. That no one would believe her, that she deserved it. "I'm so sorry, Mama," she sobbed. "I should have listened to you. I should have known." "Shh, honey. You have nothing to apologize for. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault." Over the next week, we worked together. Rebecca filed her own police reports, adding to the mountain of evidence against Trevor. Vanessa did the same, testifying about his threats and manipulation. I turned over all my documentation to the district attorney, who looked at it and actually laughed. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "this is better investigative work than half my detectives do. Trevor Hayes is going away for 20 to 30 years minimum. Attempted murder, assault, fraud, extortion, conspiracy, we're throwing everything at him." The trial was scheduled for the following January, but Trevor never made it that far. Johnny Volkov's people found him in a parking garage 3 weeks after his arrest. They didn't kill him. Johnny's smarter than that, but they made it very clear that he had two options: pay back every penny with interest, or leave Riverside permanently and never come back. Trevor chose option 2. Last I heard, he'd fled to somewhere on the West Coast, still broke, still desperate, still owing dangerous people money. I don't expect he'll live a long or comfortable life. Rebecca moved in with me for 3 months while she rebuilt her life. Her marketing firm, which she'd neglected for years while trying to save Trevor's sinking ship, came back stronger than ever once she devoted herself to it. She filed for divorce, uncontested, since Trevor was too terrified to return to Riverside for the proceedings. She started therapy, joined a support group for domestic violence survivors, and slowly, piece by piece, put herself back together. One morning over coffee, at my kitchen table this time, not the coffee shop, she looked at me and said, "How did you know? About Trevor, about everything." I thought about it for a moment. I'm a mother, and I'm a cop. Those two things combined created a pretty good instinct detector. Plus, honey, I've seen a lot of bad men in my life. Trevor wasn't even particularly creative in his awfulness. She laughed through tears. "I feel so stupid." Don't. Love makes us vulnerable. Trust makes us believe the best in people. That's not stupidity. That's being human. The only stupid thing would be staying once you knew the truth. And you didn't. You came to me, and together, we made sure he'd never hurt anyone else. Today, 4 months after that terrible 3 a.m. knock on my door, Rebecca has her own apartment again. It's smaller than the house she shared with Trevor, but it's hers. Bought with her own money, decorated with her own taste, filled with peace instead of fear. The commercial building on Riverside Drive is still mine, still generating income, still sitting in a trust that will go to Rebecca when I'm gone, protected, secure, untouchable by any future Trevor Hayeses who might come along. The Justice League still meets every morning in the park. Now we're 5 instead of 4 because Rebecca joined us. Turns out she's got good instincts too, once they're not being suppressed by an abusive husband. Between the 5 of us, we've started something new, a support network for other elderly people dealing with financial exploitation by family members. We call it Silver Shield, and it's growing every month. Beatrice handles the legal side. Lorraine manages the financial advice. Gloria networks through her business connections. I provide the law enforcement perspective and investigative training. And Rebecca? She runs the marketing and outreach, helping other victims find us, know they're not alone, understand that fighting back is possible. Last week, we helped a 73-year-old widower whose son had been stealing from him for years. This week, we're working with an 80-year-old woman whose daughter-in-law had convinced her to sign over power of attorney and was draining her accounts. Next week, there will be someone else who needs help. And we'll be there. Because the thing about getting old is that people forget you have teeth. They forget that 70 years of life means 70 years of experience, of knowledge, of connections and skills. They see the gray hair and the slow walk and the bifocals, and they think victim. But they're wrong. I'm Dorothy Sullivan. I was a cop for 42 years. I raised a daughter who survived and thrived despite marrying a monster. I took down a dangerous man using nothing but evidence, strategy, and the fierce love of a mother who won't let anything harm her child. And I'm not done yet. Would you have forgiven Trevor? Would you have let him off easier because he was family, because divorce is complicated, because going to war is exhausting? Or would you have stood your ground like I did, understanding that sometimes justice requires us to be relentless, to be strategic, to use every skill and connection and ounce of courage we have? Sometimes I wonder if younger people understand what it's like to be treated as invisible in your own family. To be dismissed because you're old, because your opinions are outdated, because surely you don't understand the complexities of modern life. They forget that we've lived through complexities they haven't even imagined yet. That our outdated values include things like loyalty, justice, and the understanding that love without respect is just manipulation. Trevor Hayes learned that lesson the hard way, and somewhere out there, maybe another entitled son-in-law or manipulative daughter-in-law will read this story and think twice before underestimating the elderly woman standing between them and what they want. Because we're not obstacles. We're not problems to be solved or assets to be acquired. We're mothers, fathers, cops, lawyers, business owners, fighters. We're people who've earned every gray hair and every wrinkle through survival and strength. And we protect our own.